Welcome in. I am so glad you could join us today.
Yeah, it's really great to be here with you.
I want you to just take a breath, kind of settle in, and get ready for a deep dive that feels, well, less like an information download and a lot more like a retreat for your mind.
I love that description. It really is a philosophical journey we're taking today.
Exactly. You and I, together, are stepping into this space of profound serenity. Our mission today is to thoroughly examine the spiritual teachings of Guru Ram Das Ji.
Right, and specifically, we're focusing on a really remarkable text from Rag Soohee.
Yes, which you'll find on page 731 of our source material. We are going to look closely at the central theme of Nam, the divine name.
And how this text presents it as the ultimate remedy.
The remedy for life's deepest, most paralyzing anxieties, right? Things like poverty, existential fear, and the relentless cycle of birth and death.
It is just a stunning piece of literature. And what we are really analyzing today is a highly detailed map.
A map.
Yeah, a map that charts the difficult psychological and spiritual terrain from a state of deep existential anxiety to a place of absolute unshakable peace.
Because the text doesn't just offer platitudes.
No, not at all. It provides a specific mechanism for that transition.
And that mechanism is what makes the reading so compelling. I've been analyzing these translations and notes all week, and the richness of the language is just striking.
It really forces an examination of what we are constantly chasing.
Yes. What we are fundamentally afraid of and how we might finally find some actual rest. Okay, let's unpack this. We begin right with the opening lines.
And the text is incredibly direct right off the bat.
It really is. It reads, I chant and vibrate the name of the Lord God, the Supreme Being, Har, Har, my poverty and problems have all been eradicated.
There is a very specific physical and spiritual action being described there with that word vibrate.
What's fascinating here is how the text characterizes the result of that vibration, the eradication of poverty.
Right. And since we're dealing with a sophisticated spiritual framework, it's clear that Guru Ram Das Ji is using the concept of poverty not merely as a lack of the divine name,
but as an active state of spiritual decay.
Exactly. It's a completely different frequency of lack. We aren't talking about economics or empty bank accounts here.
No, this poverty is that persistent gnawing sensation of ultimate emptiness.
The underlying hum of dissatisfaction that tells you, no matter what you accumulate, you are fundamentally incomplete.
And that active state of decay is a crucial distinction. It's not a passive emptiness.
It's an emptiness that consumes.
You see this paradox all the time in high-achieving environments today. People constantly attempt to fill this invisible void with external achievements, acquisitions, or status.
Oh, constantly. Yet the problems and that specific frequency of lack persist.
The text is suggesting that vibrating the divine name, tuning the internal state to the frequency of Nam, is the only specific resonance that neutralizes that void.
The chanting isn't a request for external wealth.
Right, it's a recalibration of the internal frequency.
And that recalibration shifts the individual's focal point entirely away from material scarcity and toward the infinite abundance of the divine.
So the problems are eradicated because the paradigm of the seeker has entirely shifted.
Exactly. They are no longer playing the game of worldly accumulation, so the anxieties associated with that game, they simply dissolve.
Which brings us to an even heavier existential weight in the very next line. The text states, the fear of birth and death has been erased through the word of the Guru's Shabad. Serving the unmoving, unchanging Lord, I am absorbed in peace.
Erasing the fear of birth and death that is tackling the ultimate human dread.
We are finite creatures, consciously aware of our own mortality, which creates a background noise of fear in almost every human endeavor.
It is the absolute root of human anxiety. But the solution presented here is mathematically elegant, I think.
How so?
Well, the text points to serving the unmoving, unchanging Lord. If you look at the architecture of human life, absolutely everything is in constant flux.
Our relationships, our physical forms.
Our societal structures, our cognitive states, they are all temporary and shifting. Attempting to derive absolute security from a world defined by constant change is an exercise in futility.
It generates terror because you are trying to anchor a ship to a wave.
That's a great way to put it. You are building a permanent structure on a tectonic plate that is guaranteed to shift. It is exhausting.
But the concept of the Shabad, the word, offers a different anchor point.
By tethering the consciousness to the unmoving, unchanging Lord, the chaotic dread of mortality begins to lose its grip.
The seeker is no longer solely identifying with the temporary physical vehicle that is subject to the cycle of birth and death. they align with the eternal name.
And the result of that alignment is beautifully articulated as being absorbed in peace.
That word absorb is vital.
It implies a complete saturation,
Yeah.
an immersion so total that the previous state of fear cannot coexist within the same space.
It is a displacement of dread by absolute peace.
And that total saturation really sets the stage for the raha, or the pause and chorus of the text.
Which contains some of the most striking imagery in the entire piece. The speaker, acting as the ultimate dedicated seeker, declares, "O my mind, vibrate the name of the most beloved darling Lord. I have dedicated my mind and body and placed them in offering before the Guru. I have sold my head to the Guru for a very dear price."
The imagery of selling the head in this section is incredibly intense.
It really is. Now, obviously we know this isn't physical sacrifice. I read this as the ultimate surrender of the intellect and the I. But I have to ask, as a seeker, this sounds extreme, right? The transactional nature of it, selling it for a very dear price, is a fascinating framing.
Yeah.
How do you read the economics of that spiritual trade?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the economics of this transaction reveal a profound psychological insight. The head, in this spiritual context, represents the ego,
The intellect.
right? The command center of our pride.
Mm-hmm.
It is the mechanism that constantly calculates, defends itself, and insists on its own sovereignty.
And maintaining that ego is incredibly resource intensive.
It requires constant validation, constant defense against perceived slights, relentless strategizing. It is a high-maintenance, depreciating asset.
It's the part of the human operating system that is constantly overthinking, attempting to control the uncontrollable, and generating anxiety when it fails.
Exactly. So to sell it to the guru is to practice a radical form of ego surrender.
The seeker is essentially stating that their own method of navigating existence, relying solely on their limited, anxious intellect, is bankrupting them spiritually.
They're liquidating the ego.
Precisely. And they are receiving the nam, the invaluable spiritual wealth of the divine name, in return. But to your point about the dear price, this trade is not easy.
No, it is a heavy transaction. Surrendering the ego feels like a death to the intellect. The mind wants to be the master.
Relinquishing that control, giving up the need to be right, giving up the vanity and the stubbornness that causes immense internal friction.
The price is dear because you are giving up the very thing you have identified as yourself for your entire life.
That perfectly aligns with the idea that you are trading a massive burden for a tether to the divine. But letting go of that burden requires prying your own fingers off of it.
You hand over the heavy, exhausting machinery of the ego, and in return, you get that total absorption in peace we discussed earlier.
You transition from the active decay of spiritual poverty to the ultimate spiritual wealth.
It is the realization that operating purely on one's own selfish intellect is a dead end. And the text doesn't just leave that as an abstract concept.
Right. It immediately grounds it by showing us what the alternative looks like. It contrasts this willing surrender with those who refuse to make the trade.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes, that idea of selling the head perfectly sets up the tragedy of the next section. Because if the humble seeker trades their ego for peace, the figures described in verse 2 do the exact opposite.
They trade their peace to inflate their ego.
The text shifts focus to the absolute pinnacle of worldly power, stating, "The kings and the rulers of men enjoy pleasures and delights, but without the name of the Lord, death seizes and dispatches them all."
This is a stark reality check from Guru Ram Das Ji. The text is pointing to the archetypes of supreme earthly success.
These kings and rulers represent anyone who has access to every material comfort, every sensory delight, and total worldly authority.
They are the apex creditors of the material world, the ultimate accumulators.
They are the modern billionaires, the titans of industry, the cultural icons who spend their lives building massive empires of influence.
Yet the text states plainly that without the name, death simply seizes and dispatches them. It strips away the illusion of their permanence.
No amount of accumulated wealth, status, or earthly kingdom can bribe mortality.
The vulnerability of these kings is profound because their entire identity is wrapped up in the very things they are guaranteed to lose.
But the text goes further, painting a vivid and somewhat intimidating picture of the metaphysical consequences.
It says, "The righteous judge of Dharma strikes them over the heads with his staff, and when the fruits of their actions come into their hands, then they regret and repent."
That imagery of the righteous judge of Dharma striking them over the head with a staff is impossible to ignore. It reads a bit like the universe's most unavoidable and painful performance review.
It's a highly symbolic and powerful metaphor. Dharma represents universal law, the fundamental truth and alignment of the cosmos. It functions almost like spiritual gravity.
When a life is lived entirely for the ego and sensory pleasure, like the kings who ignored the name, that life is built in direct opposition to universal truth.
You are building a structure that ignores gravity. The strike over the head isn't necessarily a vindictive punishment. It can be understood as the inevitable, painful collision with reality.
It is the moment the structure collapses and the illusion of control shatters.
And the aftermath of that collision is that they are handed the fruits of their actions, which results in regret and repentance.
You see this dynamic play out constantly, even on a smaller scale. We spend our energy building incredibly elaborate sandcastles of status, carefully curating our public image, accumulating wealth, fully aware that the tide of time is coming in.
The text isn't just offering a warning. It is diagnosing a fundamental flaw in how humanity allocates its energy.
The kings had all the power in the world, but because they ignored the eternal tether of the name, they remained spiritually impoverished.
And they only realize the wasted opportunity when the illusion falls apart. The tragedy of the kings is that they thought they possessed the world, but the material world possessed them.
And what the text does so brilliantly is pivot immediately from the devastating failure of the kings to the ultimate success of the true seeker.
It provides a masterclass in contrast.
We see that pivot in verse 3. The tone shifts dramatically from the arrogance of the kings to a place of profound, almost breathtaking humility.
The seeker pleads, save me, Lord, I am your humble servant, a mere worm. I seek the protection of your sanctuary, O primal Lord, cherisher and nourisher."
The linguistic choice to refer to oneself as a mere worm immediately after discussing the rulers of men is a staggering contrast.
It is an exercise in cosmic scale. When the text uses the phrase mere worm, it is right-sizing the human ego in the vast geometry of the cosmos.
The kings puffed themselves up, operating under the delusion that their tiny earthly domains made them the center of the universe.
The humble servant, however, recognizes the immense, unfathomable reality of the primal Lord, cherisher and nourisher, and places their own existence into its proper tiny context.
That realization of scale isn't a degradation of the self, it's a profound relief. When you stop pretending to be the king holding up the world, you are free to seek actual sanctuary.
And the nature of the sanctuary the seeker asks for is incredibly specific. They aren't asking for a reversal of fortune or a better kingdom.
The text continues, "Please bless me with the blessed vision of the saints Darshan, that I may find peace. O God, please fulfill the desires of your humble servant."
Think about the radical nature of that request. The seeker acknowledges the Lord as the cherisher and nourisher, the source of all power. They could theoretically petition for anything.
Yet the enlightened seeker knows that only one thing has actual value. They ask for the blessed vision of the saints Darshan.
Darshan refers to the auspicious sight of the divine, being in the direct presence of truth and holiness.
They don't ask for a change in external circumstances, they ask for the vision to see the divine reality.
Because simply being in the presence of that truth is what brings the absolute peace that the worldly kings could never purchase.
It's the understanding that presence is entirely sufficient. As we move into the final verse, verse 4, the text wraps up this complex spiritual map.
The seeker again acknowledges the majesty of the divine, stating, "You are the all-powerful, great, primal God, my Lord and Master. O Lord, please bless me with the gift of humility."
Even at the climax of the text, the request is not for elevation, but for the gift of humility.
Humility is the required vessel. An ego, filled with its own pride, its own anxiety, and its own calculations, is a cup that is already full to the brim.
You cannot pour the pure water of the name into a cup that is full of dirty water.
By asking for the gift of humility, the seeker is actively asking to be emptied out. They are maintaining the transaction of selling their head.
They want to remain an empty vessel so they can continuously receive the divine name.
And we see the culmination of that emptying out in the very last lines of the text.
It states, "Servant Nanak has found the name of the Lord, and is at peace. I am forever a sacrifice to the name."
It ends on this note of absolute present tense resolution. The spiritual poverty has been eradicated. The existential dread of birth and death is gone.
The ego has been sold, and the sanctuary has been secured.
This raises an important question. When we step back and look at the entirety of what Guru Ram Das Ji has presented here, what is the ultimate trajectory of this map?
It illustrates a complete paradigm shift regarding human security.
It demonstrates that the very things we reflexively build to protect ourselves, our pride, our intellect, our material achievements, our earthly kingdoms, are actually the engines of our deepest anxieties.
They are the source of the spiritual poverty.
The only true protection, the only remedy that does not decay, is the radical surrender to the eternal name.
It flips the conventional human script entirely upside down. We spend our life convinced that accumulation is the path to security, and this text meticulously details how the true secret is surrender.
We exhaust ourselves trying to be the kings of our own little universes, and the text proves that lasting peace is only accessible through the profound humility of the servant.
And as you noted, it is a peace that is available in the present tense. Servant Nanak is at peace. It is an accessible reality for the mind willing to make the trade.
It requires a brutally honest audit of what we value. We have to look at the high-maintenance asset of our own ego and decide if the exhaustion of maintaining it is worth the cost of our inner peace.
Because as the text makes abundantly clear, you cannot hold on to the illusion of worldly supremacy and the serenity of the name at the same time.
The righteous judge of Dharma eventually balances the books.
So what does this all mean? If we distill this deep dive down to its core, the philosophical takeaway is staggering.
It really is.
The true remedy for our deepest, most paralyzing fears, whether it's the sheer terror of mortality or the quiet, gnawing frequency of spiritual emptiness, is never going to be found in the accumulation of worldly power or sensory delights.
We explored the tragic trajectory of the kings who attempt that route. It ends in the shattering of their illusions and the heavy weight of inevitable regret.
Instead, the actual cure is the radical frictional act of surrendering our intellect and our ego. It is about right-sizing ourselves in the cosmos, asking for the gift of an empty cup and embracing a higher, unchanging truth.
The name is the singular anchor that halts the anxiety-inducing spin of a world in constant flux.
It is the ultimate exchange of a heavy burden for a state of profound liberation. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with.
A takeaway for the listener.
Exactly. You've explored this intricate map with us today, examining the stark contrast between the fleeting, anxiety-ridden illusions of the kings and the lasting, absorbed serenity of the humble seeker.
We unpack the intense metaphor of selling your head, the psychological trait of your ego, your stubbornness, and your constant need for control in exchange for invaluable spiritual wealth.
So my question to you, to mull over as you step back into the shifting currents of your day, is this. What is one small piece of your own ego, perhaps a deeply held need to be right, an obsession with how your kingdom is perceived, or just a stubborn intellectual defense that you would be willing to sell today? What specific burden could you surrender right now to experience even a fraction of that serene, unmoving spiritual wealth?
A powerful lens through which to view the rest of the day.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. May you find your anchor in the constant flux. May you cultivate your own inner sanctuary of humility, and may you carry the profound peace of these teachings with you into whatever comes next. Take care.